As the dawn's light began to grace Coney Street, its residents were taken aback by the sight of a stylishly dressed woman standing before the grotesque old house at the end of their street. The night's mist was still retreating, and people, preparing to head to work, gathered in curiosity, attempting to glean some insight from this elegantly dressed woman. How had someone decided to reside in this eerie house? That question lingered in everyone's mind. The well-dressed woman appeared to be a real estate agent, and she seemed to possess little information about the new tenants, or perhaps she had been handsomely compensated for maintaining secrecy. The only thing she divulged was that the newcomers had a child. Those who were eager for more details left disappointed and made their way to their jobs. The newcomers didn't have many belongings. Only 5 boxes and a few pieces of furniture were unloaded from the large truck. When the moving truck and the real estate agent departed, the house remained the same, eerie and ancient. As darkness fell once again, the residents of Coney Street found themselves gazing at a faint light emanating from the upper floor of the house. The mist had arrived earlier than usual that evening, and the light flickered dimly within the haze. Despite several days passing, nobody had caught sight of the new tenants. Only the nightly flickering light from the upper floor remained. After a few days, even this dance of light ceased, never to be seen again. The house seemed to revert to its former desolate state. Everyone believed that the newcomers had fled in secret, just as they had arrived. If they had, who could blame them? Who would willingly choose to live in such a place? The old, monstrous house had returned to its unoccupied days, but it no longer felt empty. And the residents of Coney Street began to notice a faint, albeit strange, odor permeating the street. It wasn't particularly bothersome, at least not yet. It was as if someone had forgotten to take out the trash. However, as time passed, the odors intensified and began to settle in specific areas of Coney Street. It was as if the scent of rotting garbage had been joined by other putrid smells, and with each passing day, they became increasingly pronounced. The odors enveloped the entire street, infiltrating every yard. Even the authorities who responded to complaints were left baffled. There appeared to be no source for these odors. They simply existed, with no answers to the questions of how or why. There were no visible signs of trash, spoiled food, or any dead animals. For the residents of Coney Street, opening a window or sitting in the garden had become impossible. After a few days of living with the stench of decay and garbage, people began to wake with nightmares. They would find themselves drenched in sweat, reliving past actions and contemplations through the night. It was as though night were toying with them, revealing the darkness of their souls and inflicting pain upon them. When morning came, everything seemed normal, except for the growing stench and the exhausted residents. People couldn't find respite from the exhausting nightmares. Some became afraid to sleep, while those who did sleep would awaken in terror, cursing their slumber. The residents of Coney Street were exhausted from the continuous onslaught of nightmares, as if they were running miles every night before returning to their beds. Before long, whispers and screams began to echo through the neighborhood. Initially, they could be heard in the streets, but then they infiltrated the gardens and porches. It was as if, when night fell, a multitude of entities descended upon the street, going from door to door, attempting to gain entry into the homes. They would whisper and shriek, pounding on doors and windows, not departing until the sun rose. These incidents were reported to the authorities, but the paranormal occurrences could not be substantiated. And frankly, the officials were unwilling to deal with these seemingly absurd events. A few families with the means to do so had abandoned everything, relocating suddenly. Those who remained were forced to endure these increasingly unsettling events, feeling trapped in a sinister nightmare. The residents of Coney Street were exhausted and worn down by the incomprehensible events they had endured for a brief but harrowing period. It was as if something was weakening and tormenting them, and it seemed to have achieved its purpose. In addition to their physical exhaustion, their willpower had also been sapped. Psychological battles were being lost one by one. If the aim of that entity was to break them, it had succeeded. Laughter had given way to tears and fear, and the nights had become a living nightmare. When darkness fell, everyone locked their doors and windows, drew their curtains, and waited for the night to end. The nights had become a veritable hell. Physical sounds now accompanied the whispers and screams. Doors were scratched, windows were pounded on, and the street echoed with thousands of footsteps and demonic laughter. The street seemed to tremble at night, and the constant quaking could be felt until morning. One night, for those whose willpower had grown weak and who were exhausted from battling this fear, the entities came suddenly. They were no longer confined to the street, verandas, or gardens. The sounds, the screams, the demonic laughter, and the putrid smells began to manifest suddenly in the hallways and rooms of these people's homes. Whatever these entities were, they had now invaded the last sanctuaries of the Coney Street residents. Those who experienced this horror had no choice but to hide in whatever room they could find. But even that wouldn't be enough to see the morning light. No house, room, or closet was safe. Homes were gradually occupied, and the screams of the Coney Street residents echoed through the street. When the sun rose, a heavy stench of decay permeated the entire Coney Street. The mist and fog on the street carried this odor, spreading it to every corner. The street appeared desolate and abandoned. It was as if the houses had emptied and the entire street had aged. Iron had rusted, roofs had crumbled, wood had rotted, and plants had withered. It was as if the entire street had suddenly succumbed to the passage of time and died. Everything and everyone had vanished. In what had become a small, hellish existence on Coney Street, a child emerged from the Old and Monstrous House. He gazed around, taking in the scene. This old, grotesque house was newer than the others on the street. He went into every house one by one, exploring their gardens. He surveyed the entire street. Finally, he left one of the houses, hand in hand with an elderly woman. She was covered in dirt and mud, and a portion of her grey nightgown had turned a dark shade of red. Trembling with fear and helplessness, the woman was silently weeping. Hand in hand, they stepped out into the street. When they arrived at the monstrous house, they paused for a moment. The shadows in the windows were watching them. They entered the house slowly. Inside the house, it was dark, and the air was thick. This thick air had become trapped between the weathered, rotting floorboards, hidden beneath torn and decaying coverings. They proceeded down a creaky corridor. When they reached a large chamber, the elderly woman had ceased weeping and found it difficult to swallow. In every corner of the room, there were symbols etched in blood and melted candles. In the center, 5 chests were placed in a pentagonal formation, their lids open. In the middle of the pentagon, there was a hole, and the black, vine-like, moving, thorn-covered extensions from these chests descended beneath the house. The child opened a door for the elderly woman and pointed inside. With great fear, the woman passed through the door, and it closed behind her. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she noticed a staircase leading down to a basement. She descended the stairs slowly and tremulously. At the bottom of the stairs, she saw holes dug in the darkness. Piles of earth covered the basement, and tunnels had been dug in various directions. The stench of decay and death was so overwhelming that it made her nauseous. Along these tunnels, these odors were being channeled directly into the basement and out into the street through broken basement windows. From a shadowy spot in the basement, the child suddenly emerged and approached the woman. He took her hand once more, and together they entered a massive tunnel. Every step they took in the darkness was wet and squelchy. When the tunnel finally ended, the woman believed they had arrived in hell. It was as if she had died and a vessel had brought her to her final destination, one of eternal suffering. They found themselves in a colossal underground chamber, and thousands of people were standing. Their clothes were tattered, their flesh was rotting, their skin clung to their bones, and the sounds of their trembling bones filled the atmosphere. Dark silhouettes loomed over each of them. When the torches on the walls flickered and flared, the woman's heart felt as if it might leap from her chest. The people were not actually standing. They were hanging from the ceiling of this hellish chamber. Each one had black, thorn-covered and writhing vines entering their mouths, just like those that had entered the soil from the chests in the house's parlor. There was no floor beneath their feet. A massive hole yawned below them all, and all these people dangled over it. They were alive, and the massive pit beneath them was filled to the brim with bones. The child turned to the woman. The old woman looked at the child, her face filled with despair. From the ceiling, she could see the silhouette descending for her, holding one of those vine tendrils. The child whispered,
"The darkness must be nourished."
A tear fell from the woman's chin and rang out on the floor.